Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I just thought I'd have a really chilled, chatty video based on what I experienced in my first school placement. Now, I have already given tips on certain things about how to survive at school or how to be prepared, etc, etc, but based on what I've been messaged and a few comments that I've received, I thought today I would sit down and just give a brief reflection of what I experienced in placement 1, so that I felt like I was the only person experiencing certain things and feeling certain ways. And I've already had several people that I know or people I don't know messaging me saying, oh my gosh, I feel stressed, what should I do if this happens, da 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 da, how did you feel, how did you respond? So I just thought that I'd create a video to let you know what I experienced during those first few months. I started my placement, it would have been about the 3rd week in September. So basically, as part of BCU, we were in university for the first 2 weeks of September, so when the schools start, and then we were straight into school. And so that would have meant I was there for 5 weeks before half term, 4 or 5 weeks. 4 or 5 weeks, a week off for half term, and then 7 weeks up until Christmas. And my first school placement finished at Christmas time. While I was there, I experienced a lot of ups and downs, and hand on heart, I wouldn't lie, if I hadn't have experienced those downs, I would not have made the progress in my second school placement. Not at all. And I wouldn't be where I am today. The first thing I will say is that your first school placement, not everything is going to go to plan. Not everything is going to run smoothly. And if you're somewhat of a perfectionist, a little bit like me, you might find that this makes you feel stressed. Don't worry, honestly. It's normal to feel stressed, but don't be stressing yourself out to the point that you think, oh my gosh, I did something wrong, this isn't perfect, everybody's going to be judging me, because they're not. You've just started your school placement, you know, you're not going to be the perfect teacher within a week or 2 weeks' time. So, leading on to my experiences, there are a few things that I experienced at my first school placement that I found challenging. Things that I struggled with, certain emotions I felt. So I just wanted to just have a chat and just let you know that, hey, you're probably not the only one experiencing this, and if you're not experiencing these, then great or not great, depending on a positive or negative emotion. So I found before half term, so the point we're at now, I didn't feel too stressed. I was worried. I was at that point that my mentor at school, so the other drama teacher, had assigned me schemes of work, lesson plans, and I knew after half term that certain classes would be my responsibility, and that was somewhat terrifying. It wasn't too terrifying because I'd got to know the classes before, I'd observed, I'd done some co-teaching, I'd stepped in beforehand, but I knew as of after half term that it would be my full responsibility to be in charge of that class, with obviously observation and supervision there, but it would be me leading the class. Now, I had never planned a scheme before, I'd never planned a lesson before. The most I ever planned before was I'd done workshops at university and led those kind of things, but I'd never planned a lesson for 30 kids for an hour in one classroom. I spent a lot of my half term, and I would highly recommend doing this depending on your circumstance. I spent quite a bit of half term making sure I had planned certain bits and pieces in my first week or two, so that I didn't feel that I was constantly playing catch up. And I thought by doing that I wouldn't be playing catch up. However, one thing I found, and a lot of other PGCE students found who I knew, is that you may feel, especially during your first placement, that you're constantly playing catch up. And I'll explain what I mean. So obviously I'd created a scheme of work. I'd created 3 schemes of work on my own for different year groups, So planned extensively what the 7 weeks was going to look like, what the different lessons were going to be, tasks, resources, blah, blah, blah. Now, as part of the teaching standard, standard 4 is to plan and teach lessons. However, standard 5 is to do with adapting to the needs of your pupils in your class. Now, this is what I found quite interesting, and it depends on your philosophy as a teacher or as a person, but you will find that you can plan, standard 4, you can plan a lovely scheme, lovely lessons and think, oh, I'll get all this done in half term and I won't have anything to do. That's where standard 5 quickly gets introduced. You probably won't know all the ins and outs of your pupils in that class. Don't get me wrong, you should gather your pupil information as you can, make your observations, but until you teach that class, you won't really know what is, in some senses, best for them. Now, this is where I did find I did become quite stressed with planning. I found that after half term, every single week, every single day, I was playing catch up. So this is what I mean in the sense of catch up, that I was creating lessons and I was spending a lot of time at home going, oh, that didn't work, I'll have to change it. Oh gosh, now that means I can't go with this lesson next, I'm gonna have to create another one. Oh my gosh, they didn't get that, so I'm gonna have to repeat it tomorrow. And you might think that, oh my gosh, this makes me a rubbish teacher. And at times, I thought that. And it doesn't. Actually, what it means is that what you're doing is you're reflecting on your own practice. I had lessons where I came out, I had lessons where I finished the school day and I was over the moon. I had lessons that I felt a bit confused, not knowing how it went. You know, I might have thought it went well, but the pupils didn't. There were some lessons I finished the school day and I felt really frustrated with myself, just because I felt like I hadn't done my best. And there were some lessons that I got upset over. You know, I just thought, what have I done there? And sometimes that wasn't based off my own thoughts, that was based off possibly, you know, some feedback I was given or circumstances that had happened. I never found throughout my first placement that I really got down about certain lessons, certain classes. What I mean by upset, it wasn't like an ongoing thing. It was just maybe coming to the end of the day and feeling a bit upset that you hadn't done your best. I also found that, again with that catch-up thing, that I was finding I was getting quite stressed and I was getting really frustrated with myself that I didn't have the answers. I was trying and I just thought, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing here. I wish I had this magic recipe in front of me that would just tell me how to do certain things, or the best way. But the truth is, you won't know you've done something wrong until you've done it wrong. That sounds really weird, but you won't know the right things to do until you've done the wrong things. And it's not saying that you've deliberately done it wrong. It's just that one size suits all. It's that kind of deal that, you know, one strategy might work for one class and you think, oh, I've mastered it. And then you go into another class and it just doesn't work. And you go, oh my gosh, it might even be the case you've got two very similar lessons, maybe even two very similar abilities. One strategy worked for one class, one didn't work for the other. I didn't always feel like, when I went early on, that I knew the kids inside and out, and I knew what was best for them. One thing I learned in placement 2, what I wish I'd have done more in placement 1, was observing certain individuals or certain classes in other environments. For me, I do that now. I do that now as an NQT, just to see if there are strategies I can pick up from different classrooms, or if it's the dynamic of the people that they're with, if it's individuals I'm looking at, or whether it's the space or whether it's the activity, just to see if there are any patterns emerging along other subjects, or just to see whether there's something I can learn from another teacher or another classroom that I can apply within my own subject. And I think in your first placement, you worry about so much that some things, it's not that you forget about them. It's not that. It's just you feel you've got so much on your plate that you don't know how to weigh things up. I had certain days where I felt a little bit defeated. I felt like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Teaching's not for me, that's it, I'm throwing in the towel. But actually, I think back on it now, and I think that, you know, that was just a bad day, and bad days can happen whenever. Don't think that, you know, you might have a bad day, you might have a bad lesson, a bad day, a bad week, and all of a sudden think, oh gosh, teaching isn't for me. I would highly suggest that a large part of that, if it's just based down to the classroom, is that you're not experienced, you're training, and it's more of a, similar to me, that you don't know the right answers yet because you've got to make those mistakes first. You know, you'll never learn if you don't make those mistakes. Another thing that I experienced and found in my first placement was that I didn't really understand the concept of the teacher standards fully. Okay, more in the sense, I didn't know. My presumptions is that, you know, especially when it came to evidence, I was struggling I thought, oh gosh, I've got to have individual pieces of evidence for each standard. And then a small thing clicked inside me within a few weeks of starting my placement, thought, well actually, if I'm going to refer to, if I am using standard 7 about behaviour and behaviour strategies in the classroom, then surely that links to standard 5 about adapting to the needs. If I'm planning and teaching well-structured lessons, clearly that links to standard 3 about subject knowledge. And I started to get to that point that I was going, so what do all these standards mean? And I think the funny thing is that you're constantly addressing these standards. You don't realise it. Even now, during my NQT year, I'm going, oh gosh, you know, standard 2, oh I don't really, and then I sit there and think, oh my gosh, you are all the time. You just, sometimes in my mind I treat them as separate, but they're not. They're all intertwined standards, and some certain things you don't know really what the standard means until you get that practice, until you get that experience, and you start realising that, oh no, wait, hold on, so really this is why I'm adapting lessons all the time. That's why I was playing catch up. I was planning lessons and that was great, but actually I wasn't going to know the kids, you know, even if you've been observing for 3-4 weeks, it's a different kettle of fish observing a child to when you start teaching them, you know, and that's where probably the catch-up will start to take its form. And this was something that I only began to master in placement 2, about getting to know your kids and adapting, and it's not always it's not always thinking about, oh gosh, extensively adapting your lessons at home. The big thing as well, what I picked up on in my second placement, learning and being comfortable enough to go away from that lesson plan, to just adapt there and then. What do the kids need? When do they need it? And I think that's something, that was a big thing that got me down in my first school placement, because I didn't have the confidence, I didn't have the experience and the knowledge to be able to do that. I think your first, and this is why I've created this video again, your first school placement is your biggest learning curve. I see the first school placement as it's your trial run. It's your trialing things, your first school placement is where you're going to make those mistakes. And I would suggest, without offending anybody, that if you don't make mistakes in your first school placement, that I would be very surprised, or you're not taking risks, because I think it is time for you to take risks. Your first school placement, risks in the sense that, you know, it's more about experimenting when I mean risk. It's not about risking anything to obviously the pupils. It's about, you know, taking a risk of trying a different teaching style, taking a risk trying a different activity with the class, taking a risk with maybe thinking about, oh, let's try how these pupils work together, you know. And I guarantee somewhere down the line, with one class, one pupil, whatever, something might not go to plan, but you're going to learn from that. Honestly, you will. And I reflect back on my first placement, and this sounds really corny to say, I don't focus on the negatives. And even if I do think about those negatives, or those things that got me down, I actually think that in the wide scheme of things, I'm glad I experienced it. You know, I've grown not just as a teacher, but as a person. And I wouldn't have been able to make the discoveries in my second school placement if I hadn't have had those downs. I hope this video has helped, and best of luck continuing your first school placement. Anything you'd like to know, just drop me a message, drop me a comment below, or any other suggestions for videos. But again, thanks for watching. Goodbye.